Guys ready to go? Yeah. Should we do this? All right. Hello, everybody. Thanks for coming. My name's Frank. I look like that. I'm putting my Twitter bio up here because I think it's the best description of my job I've ever given myself. I like to call myself an archivist and an historian with a game dev day job because it turns out that's not really a job that pays bills or anything. So I was born back in '82. I'm going to start this off, I should say, with a little bit of a mini bio. Just bear with me, it makes sense. I was born in 1982 with an Atari in the house, but really my first love was the mighty Nintendo Entertainment System. I don't know if you guys have ever heard of this antiquated device before. This actually came out originally in '85. I was kind of a latecomer. So, I had a couple of games. My neighbors did too. I played them. It was a toy. I was a kid. But more than that, I had a subscription to Nintendo Power. This was actually my very first issue, and it was bi-monthly at the time, meaning this is the entirety of what I read for about 2 months. And I really think that my curiosity and appreciation for the breadth of what video games had to offer started here with this issue, reading coverage of games with weird titles like Clash at Demon Head, and thank you for that one clap for Clash at Demon Head. River City Ransom was in this issue. That was a cool-looking game. There's a game in here called Dino Wars about like mech dinosaurs, and I remember, I think a lot of us did this, sort of tracing along the map with my finger, like imagining in my head what these weird games must be like to play. So that was my childhood, and then I became a dumb teenager, and I started playing with one of these instead of a controller. I kind of grew out of games, whatever that means. I think times were kind of different back then. There wasn't really a gamer culture that I was a part of. They were just toys, and I grew up, which was kind of dumb in retrospect. But that all changed in 1998 when I got my first computer. It looked something like that. I couldn't find an exact picture of my model. I also looked something like that, so a little bit kind of like that. I had long hair. And along with my first computer was my initial access to the internet, which, AOL 4.0, 100 hours free. So, this is kind of what the internet looked like back then. And with my access to the internet, I started looking up things I was kind of nostalgic for, like those video games I used to play when I was a kid. And I discovered something amazing. You could download and play Nintendo games on your computer. This is not Genesis. This is, in fact, Nesticle, which was the premier Nintendo Entertainment System emulator of the time. The word, if you don't get the joke, rhymes with a certain piece of anatomy that's on about half of us. The mascot of Nesticle, as you can see here, is the Fecal Lord, or Shit Man, depending on which part of the screen you're looking at. The icon there is a bloody hand that's actually dripping. As you can see, this was sort of the very, very mature emulation scene at the time. But Nesticle ran NES games I grew up with in various degrees of accuracy, come and go. In full speed on my computer, which was bonkers back then. Like, that was amazing. There was no digital distribution worth a darn yet. These were cartridges that I barely came across. So I started playing the games I grew up with. I played the games I rented back then, maybe. I played the games that, my neighbors had. But then I was like, wait, I can play the games that I read about in Nintendo Power, see what those are about. So, Clash of Demon Head, turns out, wow, that was a really cool game. River City Ransom, that's almost even cool. Look, this guy's going to hit that guy with a tire. That's amazing. And then Dino Wars. The Clash of Demon Head was really good, though. So I started realizing that I wasn't alone in this. I was getting really interested in what older games were and what they had to offer, and I wasn't alone. There was an emerging sort of retro gaming community at the time. These photos are from Classic Gaming Expo 1999. I couldn't find a picture of gross little teenage me in any of the archives, but this is what the show looked like. This happened to me in my hometown of Las Vegas, and I met a lot of people who shared my interest in this old stuff and in exploring the deeper back catalog of our past. And, I discovered things that even went beyond the games I'd read about. There was stuff that only came out in Japan, like Irem's Holy Diver. It was a great game. There's weird unofficial stuff. There's a Christian-themed Zelda clone where you throw fruit at Satan to murder him. It's amazing. And there's porn on the Nintendo. That's amazing. Like what a wacky world that I was suddenly finding myself into. So I started sort of wondering where these images come from? And I started thinking about what else was out there that I was missing. And it was around this time that I remembered a special I'd seen at one point in my life. I think it must have been on AMC or something, about the movies that we've lost. According to the Film Foundation, over half the films made before 1950 are gone, and about 80% of the ones before 1929. And I don't mean you can't buy these on DVD. I mean, they're gone. They don't exist anymore. And that terrified me. I mean, I wasn't particularly a film buff, but the idea of these works just disappearing forever and never being recoverable, that scared the crap out of me. So, I started wondering, is anyone doing this for games? Is anyone making sure that video games aren't doing the same stupid shit that film did to make their heritage disappear? And I mean, yeah, there were people doing this. We didn't call them archivists. We didn't call them digital archaeologists or anything, that belongs in a museum. We called them software pirates, is what we called them. And we still do, it turns out. Man, I saw what was going on. I wanted to be one of those software pirates. I wanted to be in on the ground floor because I understood at the time, and I still believe this, that we can't leave preservation up to the content owners, and that the only way to ensure the stuff was safe was to make sure it was easily accessible to anyone. But I wanted to be an effective pirate. I didn't want to do like the little niggling things that people can do. I wanted to, really strike. And I started thinking, which games were the most volatile? Which games were in the most danger of disappearing if no one did anything about them? And the conclusion I came up with was games that never actually shipped to stores. This is a very small selection of the games for the Nintendo Entertainment System only that never actually shipped. And nowadays, yeah, games get canceled because they're crap, usually, or they're unfinished. The Nintendo era, the NES era, was kind of a weird time because Nintendo's policy meant that you could only release 5 games a year if you were a publisher. Games were so cheap to make, and they were making so much money, that they would just throw everything at the wall and just come up with the 5 best ones, basically. So a lot of games that didn't ship were actually good games, or at least interesting, but for one reason or another, they just didn't ship them because they had better things to do. So, these games, these would still sometimes exist in playable form on what collectors would call prototype cartridges. So these are temporary things that are disposable, that are made to be used temporarily. They're actually stored on EPROMs, which are temporary media. So these cartridges for games like these, that is the only copy in the world anyone knows of California Raisins for the Nintendo, for example. These are games that there might only be one left of that's just slowly dying, and that's horrifying. And it's not like these are just unknown games. There were weird games like BioForce Ape that were discussed in Nintendo Power. Not that exact same issue, but later on. So I dedicated myself to this. So I started sort of tracking down, working with collectors to track down these prototypes, talking to programmers, who might still have something in their garage. I started a website in 2003 called Lost Levels, and this was, my first attempt at really preserving video game history. I recognized at the time that preservation was more than just a playable binary of a game. Game preservation to me is also everything surrounding the game, the people, the stories, the history, the ephemera. So what I did was, in addition to, frankly, pirating the video game online for everyone to download, I also, when I could, which wasn't very often because I wasn't a very good journalist yet, tracked down the people who actually worked on them to get the story behind them and find out, why they didn't come out. And sort of unexpectedly, people took notice of my work. I was writing articles, and so were the other people on my team. But I started getting work. I started freelancing for magazines and reviewing games and stuff. I suddenly found myself a video game journalist, which was cool. In 2005, I took my first job at a website that some of you may have heard of. It's called Gamasutra. If you weren't around back then, that really was the color scheme. I had nothing to do with that. I took an editorial job here in 2005. Simon Carlis, who's still around he's actually running this conference, took a chance on me, which is really cool. But, even as I'm doing this journalism stuff, my primary interest in anything I do related to games is preserving its history. So even at Gamasutra, I sort of took that with me. I started a column where I would track down people who from the industry's past who weren't so active anymore and just kind of ask them what they'd been up to, sort of get their story. Because I felt like if no one did that, if I didn't do that, no one else was going to. Like, for example, this is sort of a rare modern interview with Mike Berlin, who, was a very influential Infocom game author. He also created Bubsy the Bobcat, the butt of many jokes, but, Bubsy was okay. After Gamasutra, I worked at a company called GameTap. We were a Turner Broadcasting product. We were a games-on-demand subscription service, which is an idea that's still way ahead of its time. But again, working there, a lot of what I did was help make sure that these older games were still in print, that they were still around, like Castlevania, for example. Like I said, way ahead of its time, didn't last so long, kind of went under. So I actually went back to editorial. I got a job at 1UP. Again, just bringing that history thing with me, like wherever I go. That's what I secretly want to be doing. And every job I've ever had was an excuse to stay close to preserving history. That's just the guy I am. So, even at 1UP, I started doing more oral history reporting. This article's fantastic. Please look it up. I love it. I had a column at Games TM Magazine in the UK where, every month about game history. I actually went back to Gamasutra because they had better colors now, so they let me back in. I did articles like this one, just like this gigantic article trying to figure out when Super Mario Brothers was first sold in the US, because we don't actually know. I can't substantiate that date, and that's really weird to me. But now I'm making games. So for about the last 3 years, I've been at a studio on the other side of the bay called Other Ocean. I worked on a game called IDARB. Some of you might have seen me give a micro post-mortem of this last year with the lead developer, Mike Micah. I am still the only person to direct an official game based on the Sharknado film franchise. This is Sharknado, the video game, which, thank you, Keith, which you can no longer download on the App Store. It was for less than a year. It's not because it was bad. It was a licensing thing. The last project I worked on just shipped. It's called Mega Man Legacy Collection. So again, you're kind of seeing a trend here, right? Like everywhere I go, I try to veer it toward preserving history. The idea with Mega Man Legacy Collection was we wanted to create a boutique package and really preserve these games for future generations in a way that made sense commercially. We will get back to Mega Man, I promise, but I want to get to the point of what we're all here about. Really dirty word. Emulation. Evil emulation. I think emulation has gotten a bad rap over the years. I think that we all, not all, but I think the industry and even our consumers have a really basic misconception of what emulation is. What emulation is, and I'm simplifying it a bit, emulation is software that makes a computer act like a different computer. That's it. It's a tool. And it's a great one for many uses. Emulation is not illegal. It's not threatening. It's not unprofessional. It's not lazy. It's not the same thing as software piracy. It's not free. This is the perception that people have. And when we first started going around to clients pitching the idea of bringing back some of this NES back catalog, what we commonly heard from them was that we couldn't emulate a Nintendo console without Nintendo's approval. The implication being that there was something inherent to the NES. It could not legally be replicated in software. And that the only place you could legally emulate an NES game was on a piece of hardware marketed and sold by Nintendo itself. But you know what? No emulator has ever been ruled illegal in a court of law. That has never happened. And in fact, they tried, but we'll get there soon. But still, this persists. And in fact, Nintendo's legal page right now, if you go to their website, has this language that I looked. It's been up there for 16 years now, about how the distribution of emulation, it's going to ruin the industry. It's like the worst thing that's ever happened. I'm paraphrasing because I can't look behind myself without talking to the mic. But notice this last question where how come Nintendo doesn't take a step toward legitimizing emulators? That's like asking why Nintendo doesn't legitimize piracy. It doesn't make any business sense. Except they actually have legitimized emulators by selling you emulators. The virtual console is nothing but emulations of Nintendo games. And in fact, if you were to download Super Mario Brothers on the Wii Virtual Console, so on the left there, is a ROM that I downloaded from a ROM site of Super Mario Brothers. It's the same file that's been there since, it's got a timestamp on it of like 1996. On the right is Nintendo's Virtual Console version of Super Mario Brothers. I want you to pay particular attention to the hex values that I've highlighted here. That is what's called an INES header. An INES header is a header format developed by amateur software emulators in the late 90s. What's that doing in a Nintendo product? I would posit that Nintendo downloaded Super Mario Brothers from the internet and sold it back to you. Like, not only could no one prove that there's anything wrong with emulation, like, Nintendo is pirating its own ROMs and selling it to you. But let me put this back up on screen for you. No one has ever ruled an emulation illegal. It's never happened. But regardless of that truth, it was actually cheaper for us to come up with a method to circumvent what was technically emulation than it was to hire a lawyer to prove this to our clients. So that's what we did with Mega Man Legacy Collection. We came up with a workaround. It works really great. The result is that we can now run original NES games exactly as they would run in an emulator, but without actually emulating the CPU on the user end. It's a lot of extra work for the exact same goal. It's kind of a waste of time, if you ask me, but it got us a project. Okay, when and why did emulation become a dirty word? I don't know that there's an easy answer to that, but I think it all started in January of 1999. I'm going to let a young Steve Jobs at that month's Macworld tell you why.
So we're really, really excited about games. And again, our goal is to have the best game machine in the world. Now, this is another game machine. It's the most popular game machine in the world. Wouldn't it be great if we could play some of those titles too? Well, at Macworld today, Connectix is introducing the Virtual Game Station. It is software. It is software that they're going to sell for $49 that turns your Mac into a Sony PlayStation. It plays.
This was huge. The Virtual Game Station was the first emulator to run commercial PlayStation games at playable speeds. It was also one of the first commercial emulators. As Steve just said, thank you, by the way, Steve. They sold it for $50. And I read a report that said they made $3 million in revenue selling this emulator. But it's not just that this played PlayStation games. This was the first time in history that you could play contemporary games that you could buy at Best Buy in full speed on your computer. And, you know, it only ran real discs. You know, you couldn't do pirated software on it. But, of course, the hackers got around that really quickly. And then, just a couple of weeks later, was the first Nintendo 64 full-speed emulator that ran commercial games on a PC. Came in January 28th, the first and only release of this emulator. It was compatible with 17 games at the time, including The Legend of Zelda: Ocarina of Time, a title that had just hit American shelves 2 months prior. 2 months prior, and you could just download it. It was like a 7 megabyte file, which even at the crappy speeds we had back then was an attainable thing. You know, there had been some discussion of stuff like MAME before this, but this is really when you started seeing emulation in the headlines, and the impact on the amateur emulation world is huge. You know, before this, I think emulators were primarily seen as tools to relive the days of gaming's past. You know, sort of a gray market piracy tool for niche hobbyists. Not really, you know, something that the industry took notice of. But, you know, all of a sudden, people could download console games that were on the store shelves at that moment and pirate them for free. You know, console piracy has always existed, but the barrier to entry was high enough that this was a niche segment of the market requiring special hardware or modifying your console. But, you know, for the first time in history, console games were on the same level as PC games as far as ease of use to pirating. So this is when you started, you know, this is when that discussion became public. This is when lawsuits started getting thrown around. In fact, Sony did take Connectix to court, and well, they lost. The judge, you know, over a 1.5-year trial or something like that, found that Connectix was not violating any of Sony's trademarks or patents. And you know, it's funny, like, this was not just a Sony versus Connectix case. Sony was backed by Nintendo and Sega in this court case. Like, this was the console game industry versus emulation, the court battle, and emulation won. Sony tried again with an emulator called Bleem. I don't know if anyone remembers Bleem. That got thrown out too. So the 2 times that I'm aware of that an emulator's ever been challenged in court, it was found to be fine. So if you were a software publisher that owned games that were originally published on vintage Nintendo hardware, this is the best thing that could have happened to you. All of a sudden, the doors were open. You could start republishing your content wherever you want. You're no longer locked into Nintendo's ecosystem. And yet, this is a list, this isn't entirely scientific, it's just a quick Wikipedia scrape, but these are third-party games available on Nintendo's Virtual Console right now for the Wii U and the 3DS. These are games not published by Nintendo that you can buy emulated versions of on Nintendo platforms. There's 156 of them. The next slide is going to highlight which ones of these you can buy on platforms that aren't owned by Nintendo. Oh, that's interesting. Huh. Those look familiar. There's absolutely no reason for this. This is lost revenue. There are 150 classic games here that we know have had all their rights cleared for redistribution because they're for sale right now. All of these can be in print everywhere forever for a pretty low upfront investment, and emulation is the key to that. Emulation is, I'm just going to read the slide. Emulation is the cheapest, safest, and best way to republish an older video game on modern hardware. Thank you. There are pros and cons. It's cheaper and safer than porting. There's no source code required, like traditional porting requires. Emulation, for the most part, is portable and cross-platform. The development work that you do to emulate a game is directly applicable to getting other games to work. And the games play just as they did back in the day, exactly as they did. Cons, they play exactly as they did back in the day. It's very difficult to fix legacy bugs. You can't really go in and easily change, system limitations that would require, that would make games flicker and stuff like that. It's even harder to add new features than it is to fix bugs. And, you can't really easily add new levels unless you're going in and directly hacking the binary, which people do, but, we don't have time for that. And potentially, there's a higher CPU requirement than a direct port would require, but for vintage consoles, it doesn't really matter so much. But yet we continue porting, and I would argue that porting by its nature will always be a derivative work. That is not the original work. That is a remake. You cannot port a game without sacrificing something that was in the original. There will be new bugs. There will be inconsistencies. There will be flaws. And while it's sometimes the only valid option, porting a game from source and expecting 100% faithful reproduction of the original is both a pipe dream and a financial black hole. As nice as extra features are to have, a ported game is not the original game, it's a remake. While remakes can be great complementary pieces to the original work, that original work should also be available. I reject the notion that a classic video games needs a new coat of paint in order to be valid. I think, and this might be a controversial opinion here at the Game Developers Conference, but I think video games are an undeniable part of our history and cultural makeup, and they should be preserved exactly as they were, blemishes and all. This is a game called Ducktales Remastered. This is a remake of an NES game called Ducktales, strangely enough. Pretty cool game. They did a great job redoing the art. They changed a lot of stuff. This is the original Ducktales. I like this game even better, but maybe I'm biased. I'm kind of old. The problem is, you can only get the remake of Ducktales. The original is just gone. It's been out of print since 1989. Maybe that's okay. Maybe people prefer the remake. Maybe we don't need the old one. And maybe we should throw away the original King Kong because that Peter Jackson version's way prettier, right? Like, who needs the old one? This is a re-release of the first Zelda game from Nintendo. Nintendo changed the script at the beginning, and yeah, that's a much better script. It's much better translated. That's probably what they originally meant. And, maybe Lucas originally meant for Greedo to shoot first. Let's just keep that and throw the original away. Sometimes companies do try to toe the line between a remake and an original. This is a screenshot from The Secret of Monkey Island, whatever it was called, Special Edition? Special Edition. And these are remastered graphics. They're new. And this is the original that's in there. You can switch back and forth, kind of like that, but in a better effect, whenever you want in the game. And this is cool, except that ain't even the original Monkey Island. The original was a 16-color EGA version, and that version is unavailable anywhere. That is the version directed by the game's director, Ron Gilbert, the only one. That is the version with the art by Mark Ferrari that was drawn over for that other version. Like, that's the real Monkey Island, and we can't play that. And, you know, so even when they try, like if you can screw it up. And again, I don't know. Maybe people prefer the additional 240 colors and the CD soundtrack over the MIDI. And maybe they like Pride and Prejudice better with zombies, so we should just kill the original. I mean, what's the point of it? I want to make a point that I don't think I'm just a particularly nostalgic person who likes old games and that there's no market for them. I think old games are very popular right now. Here's that same DuckTales game being played in 2014 on Awesome Games Done Quick. This is an incredibly popular event where speedrunners play through games. Tons of people watch them. How much? There's 40,000 people a couple years ago watching someone play the 8-bit version of DuckTales. And okay, yeah, 40,000 people are probably always watching that stream, no matter what game's on there, right? I went to YouTube a couple days ago. I searched for DuckTales NES and just filtered it over the last week. There are several new videos over the last week of this one random NES game that I picked. It was a popular game, but you know, I picked it randomly. And this is a game that people still want to play. And the only legal way they can do it is to go on eBay and do this. It's to get, you know, a vintage NES console that spits out the 240p signal that most of your damn TVs don't even support anymore, and to get this, like, collector's item cartridge. That's the only legal way to play DuckTales, and that's weird to me. But I don't know, maybe there's not much of a market for content from 1989 anymore. So let's do a little quick study. This is IMDb's most popular films of 1989. I didn't even bother scrolling down the pages, just a quick exercise. So I think Batman, Ghostbusters may be unfair comparisons. You know, Dead Poets Society, pretty good movie, but not really DuckTales. I think the most DuckTales equivalent here would be Uncle Buck. Uncle Buck was a John Candy, Macaulay Culkin vehicle. It was actually a pretty good movie, I think. It's one of those movies where I think I've seen it, but I'm not sure. I have positive feelings about it for some reason. So, as you might imagine, at the time it was released, you know, whatever formats made sense at the time. There was VHS, there was Betamax in the middle, there's a Laserdisc version. So did Uncle Buck make the transition to the future formats? Oh yeah, there's a widescreen DVD. There's probably a full screen DVD for people who are stupid and don't like the black lines. They even reprinted it with slightly different packaging. You can get it with Brewster's Millions. You can get it with Brewster's Millions and also Stripes. You can get it with whatever The Great Outdoors is. You can get it with The Great Outdoors and also whatever that is, Going Berserk. You can get it in a classic comedy pack for cheap. You can get it on Blu-ray. If you're a true Uncle Buck connoisseur, you can get it in 1080p on Blu-ray or on Blu-ray with a digital copy. There's a variant there, too. You can get it with Fletch on Blu-ray. I mean, and it's more than just physical. You can get it digitally, however you want. You go on Amazon right now. You can get it. You can get it on iTunes. You can get it on Google Play. Get Uncle Buck on whatever Cinema Now is, but you shouldn't because it's $14, which is more than the other ones. Voodoo. You can go on YouTube and just watch Uncle Buck. You just pay YouTube some money and watch Uncle Buck right now. Go on Flickster where it's even more expensive. You can buy it from Microsoft and Sony on their video game consoles and watch it. And yet you can't buy DuckTales. And there is, it turns out, a new HD version of Uncle Buck, but they didn't go and get rid of the old one. They kept the other one in print because it's still valid. But okay, maybe DuckTales is an anomaly. Let's look at 1989 in video games on Wikipedia. This is their list of what they consider notable games, the editors of Wikipedia. I would argue for several more than this, but you know, this is fine. This is a good starting point. It's just a quick exercise. Great stuff on here, right? There's 16 of them. So those are all of them. How many can you buy right now? You can buy 5 of them. That's a respectable, what, like 30% or something? How many of these can you buy in more than one place? Oh, that's interesting. That theme just keeps coming up. Okay, but how does that actually compare to film? All right, here are the top grossing films of '89. We don't know the top grossing games of '89 because our industry is shit at tracking sales. Sorry if you're young. But these are the top 10 grossing films of '89, period. How many of those can you get right now? Oh, you can get all of them. right now. But how many of them can you get cross-device, cross-platform? Oh, you can get all of them, cross-device, cross-platform. Every one of these, you can rent an SD, you can rent an HD, you can buy an SD, you can buy an HD, with the exception of Little Mermaid. You can't rent Little Mermaid. All of them are on Blu-ray except for Look Who's Talking. I'm sorry if you're a huge fan of Look Who's Talking. But like these movies have always been in print, and games could have been the same way, except that we demonized emulation, and by demonizing emulation instead of embracing it, we've devalued our heritage. Emulated classic console games are now presumed free. By not embracing it as a tool, we've relegated the majority of our past to piracy, and that's sad. Not because I weep for the lost revenues of corporations, but because this has had a direct impact on keeping our very history alive, on maintaining the franchises that we love, on supporting the creators that made them, and all of this could have been prevented if we'd embraced it instead of fighting it, but we messed up. This is not to say there's no such thing as commercial emulation. There are releases. I just pulled a couple examples here. This is on the Humble store. SNK recently started selling emulated versions of its classic games for the Neo Geo console. These run in a browser. They run wonderfully, actually. The emulation's great. They're $8 a pop. Totally bare bones, though. Like I don't even, there's no online or anything. I don't even think you can reconfigure your buttons. But the games work only in your browser. So you're sort of limited to what you can do. But there's stuff on consoles, too. There's the Arcade Archive series from Hamster. These are wonderfully emulated as well. Exclusively on the PS4. They do one of these a month. They're also $8 each. And these are just two examples. There's others I could name off. There's Project Egg in Japan does MSX stuff. There's the occasional semi-random emulated games on mobile marketplaces. Someone tried to sell Bubsy on Steam for some reason. And of course there's Nintendo's Virtual Console. But I don't think these work to keep the games alive because these piecemeal releases are very limited. They're usually on a single platform. The selection is just bizarrely random because it's just the stuff people happen to be able to clear the rights up for easily. They don't tend to add any value, and in the end, they're selling you a ROM for $8. And there's a certain audience of people, emulation-savvy people, who have this stuff for free and are playing it in a superior experience with stuff like MAME. I think that we've sort of considered these people a lost cause, like, oh, those are the pirates, they would never buy the games. But I challenge that notion. The people who love old games enough to go out of their way to make them play, that should be our target audience. That should be exactly who we're selling to. These are my people, and if I can sell to them, I can sell to anyone. So at Digital Eclipse, we have a specific approach. We make boutique packages for fans and collectors. Our approach is to sell them with as much source material as is possible to sort of stick in the package. Create a package with a lot of added value, stuff it with as much as we can, sell it on every platform that makes sense. As I said when I helped to relaunch Digital Eclipse last year, because it's actually an old brand that we just brought back, we feel that classic video games deserve the equivalent of the Criterion Collection, a curated selection of important pieces of history restored to their original condition, packed with bonuses to help contextualize and celebrate that work. For certain games, I think this kind of package has significantly more sales potential than simply selling a playable ROM. We were fortunate enough to find a partner in Capcom for Mega Man Legacy Collection, which was our first attempt at this. Legacy Collection collects the original 6 Mega Man games for the NES. We wanted to create a package that would provide value for anyone interested in these games, even if they already owned them or emulated them or whatever. We wanted to create a collector's edition that fans would want to keep on their shelves, even if it wasn't physical, just mentally in their shelves, I guess. Include anything we can get our hands on. I want to quickly show off some of the features that we added to this effect. This is not a sales pitch. I just want to show this stuff off because it's cool. So this is the museum that's in the game. Fortunately, Capcom kept a lot of the original art, so there's a lot of promotional work. These are from a marketing guide that they still had. This is concept art. And, look how cool this is. You could zoom in on these things. There's just a ton. There's something like 800 pieces in the package, which is awesome. This is a screenshot from a prior re-release of the Mega Man games. This is the complete works for the PlayStation 1. It was only ever in Japan. This is a cool feature that Capcom did back then, back in '99 or whatever it is. It's called the database. This collected every character in all the games, showed you their stats, what they were weak against, and gave you a description which provided backstory, which is really cool because this backstory to these characters was never reprinted anywhere else in any other language other than Japanese. So we ported that over and we made that HD, and we helped translate it to the 6, I think, languages. But we also added another feature while we were at it, which was, because we could, you could just go ahead and practice fighting one of the characters from the database, which is, I think, is a really fun thing. Mega Man, of course, known for its soundtracks, so we wouldn't be doing our jobs if there wasn't a soundtrack player. My only regret is not calling it Sound Test, which was what they call it. And this is what we call the challenge mode. We wanted to give people a new way of playing the game. So this is a section from Cutman's level in Mega Man 1. That portal right there, that's not in the original game. We added that in. When you enter one, you actually get thrown into a different section of a different stage. The idea here was it's a time attack speedrun mode that makes you think about the games in a different way. But more than that, I'm going to switch to a different challenge. This is a challenge against the Mecha Dragon boss from Mega Man 2. So it's a time attack, and at the end, after I win here, thank you very much, that was me, 28 seconds, not terrible. You get a result, you get a badge, you get to save your replay, but more than that, there's a leaderboard. So you can go and instantly watch how the fastest person in the world killed Mecha Dragon, which I probably should have recorded the whole thing, but I cut it off, I'm sorry. But more than that, getting back to the Criterion thing, artistic intent was important to us, so we actually created modes that simulated the CRT televisions of the time. This is, it looks better in 1080p, the 720p squashing kind of messes with it. But there was a TV mode, and this is sort of the best of both worlds. We call it monitor mode, that retains the scanline skipping and the aperture grill, but none of the fake noise of the composite mode. The reason we did that stuff is because we feel that there's no way of really knowing what the artistic intent was of those sprites. I think even if you rounded up all the original Mega Man artists and asked them, they wouldn't be able to definitively answer like, oh yeah, we assumed there would be some TV noise, so we drew the sprites that way. So we tried to make all those options available because I don't think there's any way of really nailing like this is what these games are supposed to be like, so we left that option open. That's really important to me, and if you guys are doing emulation packages yourself, please do that. So these features add a lot of value, but more importantly, they did not add a significant cost to the development budget. Our intent was to show that you can have the perceived value of an HD remake without having to invest in the extreme expenditure that those require. Because all of our code was written in-house and our code base is cross-platform, we were able to put this entire package together with a core team of just about 3 developers, give or take, in about 8 months. And we also ported it to the 3DS, and that was its own product. But again, small team, very lean. We got it out, and it works. And the result was that the fan outcry was so significant that they made a physical version that they hadn't planned on. People want this stuff. This works for Mega Man. I don't think this works for Ninja Kid, which was the example we gave earlier from the arcade archives. I would buy the heck out of a Ninja Jajamaru Legacy Collection. I would. The games are really neat, but I think I'm a very small audience. So I don't think you can really justify this treatment for every game. I think it has to be a franchise that people already know and love. But I think there's another way. Here's how to keep every game in print on every platform without spending a ton of money, basically forever. We're going to circle back to Uncle Buck for a minute. Hi, Uncle Buck. So how is it that Uncle Buck has remained in print across all these different platforms? Is Uncle Buck just worth more money than the NES version of DuckTales? Maybe. Maybe it's got a better audience, but I think it's a lot simpler than that. Uncle Buck remained in print because video has format standards that are very inexpensive to quote-unquote port to. I think the biggest upfront expense in keeping a movie in print is, My computer is not happy right now. But I think the biggest expense in keeping a movie in print is the upfront cost of digitally scanning it. Every film has to be scanned, digitized, and cleaned up. But, it's not really that expensive. But the thing is, once you have a scan of a movie, you have a master file that is very, very easily portable to any format. You'd probably send a raw file to Amazon, and they just push a button and encode it and push it live, and that's it. So, you have this method of getting a really direct copy of the movie that's more or less pristine, and you have ways of deploying it very easily. And it's real sad that we can't do that for games, right? We have no notion of scanning a game. We have no notion of codecs for games, right? No, of course we do. Video games are just binary files. You can make a perfect copy of a game easily. It's actually in a better state than film. And guess what? You often don't even have to do the work of digitizing those games because the pirates have done it for you. So just go on the internet and take it if you want to. I posit that an emulator is just a video codec for playing video games, and we got to start thinking about it that way. Or if you prefer, I think a video codec is nothing but a film strip emulator. And this is the mindset that I think this industry needs to be in order to push, our back catalog back in print and make me happy. So, every time we re-release an old game, we sort of reinvent the wheel, and we port it or we build an emulator from scratch, and we just all this wasted effort for no reason, with one exception. All right, so here's an interesting selection of games. Does anyone know what the common thread here is between these games? Yes?
They're all PC games.
They are not just all PC games. They all run on MS-DOS, which was Microsoft's pre-Windows standard. These are games you can buy digitally right now. There's a large number of companies represented here. There's Apogee, Activision, Bethesda, Electronic Arts, LucasArts, which is Disney now. It's still weird to think that. But in addition to all being run, native DOS games, they have another thing in common. They're all using the same emulator. This is called DOSBox. Does anyone know DOSBox? Yeah, DOSBox is sort of the premier DOS emulator. It can run DOS games of a certain vintage at full speed on just about any modern computer. It's a great piece of tech, but more importantly, it's open source. It's distributed under a GPL2 license. What does that mean? You may ask as my computer loads it. Well, GPL2 license means, there you go, look at the green. Open for commercial use. It gets a little bit complicated, some moving parts of it, but essentially you can sell a DOS game with DOSBox, and all you really have to do is include DOSBox in the package. And that's what everybody does because it's easy and it's free. And, these games are now in print again because there is an open solution for everyone to use. I looked at GOG.com, and my rough count is they're selling about 140 DOS games right now. And, a lot of the classic catalog that people remember and want is represented and is represented already. And when it's not, people figure it out and they get it up there. They've done a great job of keeping these games in print. Now, if only there was a DOSBox for everything else, right? Some news happened a couple weeks ago. Some of you might have missed it. Some of you might have not. MAME just went open source on March 4th of this year. MAME, as you may or may not know, is the standard for arcade board emulation. It emulates thousands of them. I mean, I don't even know what the count is anymore. And it's been around since '97. And if you read the text, it is now being distributed under that exact same GPL2 license. We are now in a situation where we can use MAME for commercial releases, and that's not all. In May of last year, MAME absorbed its sister project, MESS. What MAME was for arcade games, MESS was for everything else. This is a list that's going to load any second here, I promise, of drivers that are in MESS right now. MESS is basically like every console and computer ever. Look, there's 2,176 of them. Like between MAME and MESS, basically everything's covered in some form. Now, I'm not saying MAME and MESS are perfect. There's a lot of inconsistencies. The emulation usually isn't the top notch for consoles in their MESS/MAME equivalent, but it's open source. Its code base is out there. It can be contributed to. Just about any game can be run through MAME, and if you think about this, it's basically a video codec for video games. We're already kind of there. We've already begun the process internally of porting MAME to our own tech. I don't know if, we have no commercial products that we're using it in right now, but I wouldn't be surprised if that happens. And I would be shocked and frankly a bit offended if we're the only ones that are smart enough to do this. But, we're a studio. I can imagine someone like an Amazon forking MAME, bringing it in-house, bringing it up to snuff, and bringing games back to the level of, Uncle Buck, where, I can envision a future where we respect Ducktales for the NES as much as we respect this John Candy classic. I want to thank you all very much for coming to my talk. It's about all I've got. Couple reminders. You will get an email to evaluate me as a speaker. Please rate me as you see appropriate. Please, these are your takeaways. There is an audience for old games. Out-of-print games are lost revenue. Emulation's cheap and accurate. Embrace the emulator. And I will now open it up for questions. Have we got no questions? Are we done here? I think microphone in the middle is where you want to go. Yes, John Paul Dyson of the Strong Museum of Play in Rochester, New York. How can I help you?
Thanks. So what do you think about commercial versus, say, what the Internet Archive is doing with JS Max?
Oh, yeah. This is a great point. So a lot of these games are absolutely easily playable in your browser right now. They are kept in print unofficially, but the point I'm trying to make is that commercial emulation has its value too. I think that especially for products like we make, where the idea is to gather the ephemera and the materials and really make a collector's edition and really preserve the game properly beyond a playable binary, I think you need money. I think money needs to be invested in that, and I think that commercial emulation can coexist with the quote-unquote unofficial emulation. But thank you for bringing that up. Again, the pirates have it covered. I was a pirate myself. I kind of still am. I don't mean to imply that commercial emulation can somehow be better than amateur. I don't think that will ever happen. Yes, Kyle.
Hey, Frank.
Hi.
The legal cases you cited are from 15 or 16 years ago, I think. If they did it again for the NES emulators inside MES, do you think Nintendo's going to have a problem with it? Maybe they'd be able to prevail this time if they took it to court?
No, I don't think there's anything that you can show for. I mean, using the NES as an example, I don't think there's anything in there that you can show that violates any of Nintendo's patents or trademarks. And in fact, something about that case is that case was able to prove the legality of reverse engineering a BIOS chip for the sake of emulation. That was established in that case. That's on paper. I don't see a problem in any way. The only problem I can see is if an emulator distributes the unaltered BIOS from a console, because that is code that they don't have the rights to. But if you're emulating a platform and not using any code that is proprietary, I don't see how that can be challenged legally.
Thanks.
I think it would have been done by now.
Hey, I was one of the original developers of MAME, so I really appreciate this talk.
Oh, sure.
I really appreciate the work you're doing.
I appreciate the work you're doing.
I assure you that all the developers of MAME, they would be the first that would run out and buy any kind of officially licensed collection. So we're starting to see things like Star ROMs, came and went.
Yeah.
But I was curious, you mentioned that the Capcom collection for Mega Man wasn't actually an emulator, but it was very faithful. You're still like, well, how did you do it?
How did we do it? Okay, sure. So like I said, we sort of found a workaround that wasn't technically emulation, but had the exact same result. And basically what we did was internally we were emulating the game, but we statically recompiled it into C.
Gotcha.
So that we weren't shipping any emulation code. We were just doing the exact same things an emulator would without actually emulating it. And everyone seemed satisfied by that. So that's what we did. Beautiful. It's silly. It's really silly. Beautiful. But I will say that did give us some unexpected advantages when we were making that challenge
Allows
mode.
you to make modifications.
Yeah. So it became a little bit easier to modify the game, and we could do things like draw a portal in game space and have it scroll because we know exactly where to interrupt in the code because we can look at it.
Great, thank you.
Thanks.
Hello.
Hi.
So in the spirit of preserving history, do you think that it's still true that the most at-risk pieces of history are the ones that never made it to shelves, like you mentioned earlier, or are there new targets in 2016 where you're thinking, wow, we're at risk of losing this stuff?
You're trying to get me to talk about PT?
I don't know anything about it. I'm just curious.
Can everyone hear the questions in the mics, by the way? I'm supposed to repeat them. Okay. That example I made I was thinking specifically of the NES, or maybe a little more broadly of console video games of that vintage. I still believe absolutely those are the ones most in danger of disappearing. But in terms of the broader scope of game preservation, what do I think is in the most danger? I don't think we've really solved the philosophical debate of how do you preserve an online experience. And that is something way beyond my scope. I would refer you to Henry Lowood at Stanford for their efforts on that. But I mean, another example I like to give is it's not just MMOs when I say that. It's like Farmville, right? Like, even if you hate Farmville, is Farmville preserved? Can we play the first version of Farmville anymore, or is that does Zynga even have that, right? So I think there's bigger problems to solve, and I think those debates become more philosophical than technical, because at that point you're just kind of questioning what does it mean to save a game. So for online stuff, maybe it's just a whole lot of video footage. Maybe we start. JP over there had a great quote in an interview once where he thought of it more like preserving baseball history, where it's not, you don't preserve like all the players in the stadium and everything, but you preserve everything that happened. And I think for impermanent games, I think we should think about it more in that way.
Cool, thanks.
Yeah, thank you.
Hi, Frank.
Hello.
Given the challenges you faced with static recompilation versus actual emulation, and the skittishness of the companies that you were talking to prior, how would I, as somebody who wants to get in on something like this using emulation, convince, say, a Capcom or a Konami or a Square Enix to do something like this via emulation?
This talk will be on GDC Vault in 30 days. We can start there. But, I mean, you're asking me to solve for you the problem that I myself have not solved yet. So I really don't know how to answer that for you, unfortunately.
Granted. But
I think bringing this discussion public and then shaking people and saying, look, emulation is good. Emulation is good for you. It's not piracy. It's a tool. It's the best tool. I think really making that stuff public and bringing that to light, I think, is the first step toward that. Hopefully my company will help further that. So that's what I would say to you.
And on a slightly different note, Super Star Wars is now available on PlayStation 4.
It is. It's true. That was done by Code Mystics, in fact. And I have not played it, but I understand that it's a really good emulation of it. So I believe, yes, that we now have Super Nintendo emulation on another platform, which is real good news for everybody.
All right, thank you.
Thank you.
Hi there. Regarding the context of what you put into preservation, sort of a pack like Mega Man Legacy Collection, what pieces of information did you wish you were able to get? Or what questions did you have that you wanted in the collection? And what would you want answered in future collections that you might not be able to get?
So our goal was to contextualize the games, because I feel that that's important to preserving them in the way that I think of preservation. And what I think was missing from Mega Man was developer insight. There were several challenges in getting developer insight for these particular games that I really can't get into, but I do feel that piece was missing. So we had this concept again of what would a Blu-ray collector's box set of Mega Man be like, and I think all of those games would have director's commentary. And unfortunately, we were not able to put that in. But in the future, yes, absolutely. I think that's an important piece to put in there. That said, I also think that it's more than just the making of the game. I think it's also the selling of the game that's a compelling part of the story. So, I would love to do mini documentaries that maybe dig up, old news footage and stuff like that, or photos of people playing the games back in the day. I think there's a lot more ephemera that we don't really think about when we think about containing a game in a package.
Thank you.
Yeah, thank you. And I should say also other development materials other than art too, like design documents, things like that, anything that's still around. I often think about when I talk about preserving these other ephemeral pieces of video game history, I always think about the Blu-rays I have for classic movies like Casablanca and Citizen Kane, where you listen to it's not director's commentary, the historian commentary, right? And they're like citing studio notes that went back and forth that still exist, that are in an archive that they can access. And I don't think we have an equivalent of that in the video game industry, other than, we're starting to. I'm going to mention JP Dyson over there at the Strong Museum again. There are certain organizations like his that are starting to collect the paperwork and the ephemera around games to make sure that stuff is accessible to researchers. So, I think that's an important part that I would love to start including in future collections.
Hey, first of all, this was a very good talk. Thank you for doing it. Secondly, my question is concerning price point.
Mm-hmm.
So recently, my little company was part of an effort to release what most would consider an older game on Steam. And this was a PC game and whatnot, and it was priced at around $30. And there was a decently significant amount of pushback against this.
Against the price point.
Against the price point,
sure.
Yes. And so I'm wondering, what do you think would be a good price point for
I'm not answering that.
But yeah, or maybe, did you get any pushback on the price point for the Legacy Collection?
Well, we didn't set that. So this was entirely a work for hire situation. So we pitched the project to Capcom. We got them on board with it, but ultimately it's their product and we just made it for them. So all that price point stuff was way out of my hands. I think it should have been more, frankly, if you want my personal opinion. But that is because of the presentation of it. And I think giving it that higher price point gives it that more of a boutique feel. But that said, I suspect that $30 is a high price point for an individual older game. Which is why I'm suggesting these two alternatives, right? Which is either actually make a big deal out of it, right? Yeah. Like make a really boutique collector's thing, or get us to the point where getting these games running is just such a cheap thing that we can do the Spotify of video games or something, right? Mm-hmm. Like I think both of those are, effective solutions. And man, I meant to talk about Napster in this talk and I forgot.
And one little comment about piracy.
Yeah.
So my first project was a quote-unquote doujin title that a lot of us were afraid wouldn't even sell 10,000 copies because, hey, it's Japanese independent games. They get pirated to hell and back. 5 years and 450,000 copies later, I've gotten hundreds of emails about people who pirated the game, pirated our release of the game, were impressed by it, and then bought the game because they liked it.
Absolutely, yes. And I'm sorry to interrupt.
Pirates will be customers.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you. Yes. Thank you for pointing that out. And in addition to that, I think this industry has all but ignored the concept of a secondary market for its games.
Yes.
I think we just release a game and those are the sales we get, and then we walk away with our tails between our legs. Whereas every other industry repackages its content because it's easy to do so. So. Yeah.
Okay. Thank you.
Thank you.
A lot of good questions.
We've got about 3 minutes left, by the way.
Sure. Charlie from Polygon.
Hi, Charlie.
I guess I just wanted to ask a point of clarification. So it was really interesting to see you mention that Inez header on Super Mario.
Oh, is this going to be your headline?
I think I heard you talking about it on Twitter a while ago. When did you first find that?
Oh, I did not discover that myself. That was discovered on, what forum? I think it was the Nest Dev forums is where that was first discovered. But I did validate it myself as of last night. So,
which Super Mario that's available from Nintendo is that?
Wii Virtual Console is the one I looked at.
Wii Virtual Console.
Yeah.
Interesting. A lot of other questions that were already asked. Thank you.
And to be fair, there's no guarantee that they downloaded the ROM, but I don't see any alternative for there being an INES header and a Nintendo product.
Right.
Hey,
this has to be the last question, I guess. But
there might be one more.
Okay, cool.
If you hurry up, come on.
Okay, so basically my question is, so obviously you're doing a lot of technical workarounds to get past the issues regarding certain copyrights with regards to BIOS and such. At what point do you think it becomes necessary for game developers and sort of the entertainment software consumers to get together to try to lobby for changes with regards to copyright law, a la Lawrence Lessig?
I don't think we're strong enough to do that.
Okay,
I really
answers
don't.
my question.
I don't think that the video game industry I don't think games are old enough that we're going to be able to do that for quite a while. But I would also agree with Jason Scott, who was like last year's video game history talk guy, that who cares? Like that stuff's on the Internet Archive. It's not in your hands. Just go play it. But I don't think I think the commercial sales of older games, has appeal, and I think that it's a positive, and we should do as much of it as we can. But I don't think that. And this is just a personal opinion, not the opinion of my employer, blah, blah, blah. I don't think that is the only way to save a game. I think the games are more or less saved. My concern with commercializing them is that I want them to stay alive in the public consciousness.
Thank you.
Probably last question. No more? No more questions. But I will be, where's the room, the after room that we can talk in? It's like down the hall that way or something. So. There's a room they set aside. I'm going to walk toward it right now. If you guys have any further questions, I'm happy to talk to you. Or if you just want to say hi, I'm happy to talk then too. Thank you very much for not going to the Miss Pac-Man talk and instead coming here. I really appreciate that.